I'm Yvonne Hamoud, registered social worker and owner of New Moon Counseling, but out of the office, I'm a mom, wife, daughter, sister, and friend. Join me each week as I sit with a special guest to discuss everyday things that impact our mental health. We'll be chatting about everything from mental health and relationships to media and current events, as well as personal experiences and reflections, all in the hopes of normalizing our humanness and helping you see that you're not alone. This is Outside the Therapy Room. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Outside the Therapy Room. Today we are joined by Kaitlin Baldwin. Hello.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm here. I'm here with you, and I'm actually very excited to do this because I love podcasting and I miss it dearly. So I feel excited.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. I'm so excited to have you on here. We've been connecting kind of on and off on social media over the last couple of years. And so it's so nice to actually get to meet you in person, virtually.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, this is the first time we're actually like
Yeah.
I just clued in. I feel like I've seen
like
your
it.
face so much. Yeah.
Yeah, same.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Oh, that's funny. But yeah, so thank you so much for being here today. We usually start off by doing kind of like an intro outside of your profession, sharing a little bit about yourself, but also you are a registered psychotherapist.
Correct.
Yeah. So tell us more.
Yeah, I'm Kaitlin. My pronouns are she, her. I am a white pansexual woman, lady. I am a very nerdy person. I'm a very passionate and intense person. Those that follow me on social media know that in the way that certain videos come through. And yeah, I don't know. I've just like always been the type of person that like really deeply cared. I've always been like a very big feeler, have a lot of emotions, and that kind of drew me to the work. And yeah, I feel like those are probably the relevant pieces.
Yeah. Thank you. I do actually love your social media. I think you're so brave for being so outspoken. I think sometimes I hide a little bit, but it's been so awesome to kind of see your posts.
I appreciate that. I mean, sometimes it's hard for me, like, because I made this joke to someone the other night. I don't necessarily want like another white woman to be told that they're so brave. I think I have a lot of privilege in how I present to the world just kind of naturally. And so it feels a bit easier for me to be more assertive and more loud and upfront about things because the risk to me is lower. And so obviously like today we're going to talk a lot about suicidality and, you know, my approach to that. And it's risky in certain ways, but it also feels like I have to use my privilege to lean into that risk because I know there's a lot of people that can't. I'm also just a loud person. Like I have always since being a kid, I was the kid to like argue with teachers and get sent to the principal's office because I could not stop talking. So it just kind of fits naturally to continue happening now in adulthood.
Hey, it's a strength. It's a strength you had as a kiddo, but definitely today, as you mentioned, we are talking about suicidality. And I think I mentioned this before we started recording, but there's been a lot of folks who are looking for ways to support loved ones who are maybe experiencing thoughts of suicide or have attempted suicide before. And so trigger warning, a little delayed. We will be talking about suicide today. But yeah, so like there's been a lot of folks trying to find ways to support their loved ones or other people in their life. And it can be so complicated now to kind of know how to support folks in a way that is going to be resourceful, kind, and unharmful to that person who's struggling. And so I thought maybe we could start a little bit by explaining maybe some suicidal behaviors or intentions, because as we talked before we started recording, the information that's out there isn't always, it kind of paints pictures in like one kind of sided, right? And that's not always how it is. Yeah. So what are some...
Sorry, go ahead. There's definitely in mental health awareness campaigns and suicide prevention campaigns, it definitely paints a very like narrow picture of what it looks like when someone is struggling or suffering, especially around suicidality. And so, yeah, it's important to recognize that a lot of the messaging we'll get of like what it looks like to be suicidal or when someone's at risk, might not be true just because humans are different. And so humans are going to show
Yeah.
up differently. And it also depends on the relationships they have with you and how much trust there is in that. So it's almost tough for me to answer the question of like what would be some, behaviors or telltale signs. I think because I hold a lot of space and respect for, much of the work that's been done around like advocacy for folks who are suicidal and advocacy around anti-carceral practice, which we'll talk about in a bit, has been done by, lived experience survivors, MAD survivors. And there is a lot of importance around kind of noticing and naming how psychology will like we decide what we think is problematic or we decide what is a risk sign.
Yeah.
So I'll answer the question, but I want to just kind of give that disclaimer first
Yeah.
because, yeah, it's easy for maybe us as therapists to be like, oh, well, this is what I see and this is what would make me worried, but it doesn't actually mean that it's a problem or something
Yeah.
risky for a person. And I want to answer this question clearly, but I think honestly my most honest answer is going to be like asking the person themselves, right?
Yeah.
And not even asking in a way of like, hey, what should I look out for to know that you're suicidal? Although maybe that's how you go about the question, but it could also just be a question of, hey, friend, I care about you, I love you, and I know that you struggle with your mental health. Are there things that I should be looking out for that might tip me off to the fact that you need more support? Are there certain telltale signs that you can tell me rather than me deciding for you? Oh, your camera went off for a second.
Yeah. I don't know what's
It's
happening.
all
Okay,
good.
sorry.
No, and especially because like, again, if we look at stereotypical symptoms of like depression, and things like, isolation or being withdrawn, 100% for a lot of people that can really be indicative that they're in a more suicidal place. However, for some people, that isolation and withdrawing might be a way of like conserving energy. It might be a way
Yeah.
of kind of managing their own overstimulation. It could be a very protective and functional thing. So I think, yeah, the complicated but honest answer is like to really ask people themselves, what are the things that you want me to pay attention to that might signal to me that you need some more support?
Yeah, I mean, we even talked about that in a postpartum mental health episode of just like talking to the mother about
Yeah.
what do I need to look out for when you are not doing so great or when you require extra support instead of you just telling me in that moment. 'Cause sometimes it can be so hard. And so I actually love that. And I think it's
Yeah.
also so individual. I think all of, like you pointed out, for some people, being in isolation is actually something they do for self-preservation and self-care.
Yep.
And like, they
100%.
enjoy that, they thrive in it, and for another person that may be those signs. And so I think it's really, really hard to really pinpoint when those signs are. I think it's okay for me to just like bring this into the conversation for a little bit. I think everyone was so shocked when Twitch, the dancer, committed suicide or died by suicide because he presented in a very happy way. And I think that's the case for a lot of celebrities that we see who have
Robin
passed.
Williams, right?
Oh my
So many
gosh.
comedians in ways where people look at them and they see that they're presenting as not even happy, but like social and engaged
Yeah.
and popular, and
Yeah.
maybe a lot of these like status symbols that we've associated with a happier life, right? I think we've been conditioned in a lot of ways to think that if you're rich and if you're popular and
Oh
if
my
you are,
goodness. Yeah.
you have all of these cool, lovely things that we've been conditioned to want, that, oh no, your risk is way lower.
Yeah.
When it's obvious that's not the case, right? And you made a really good point about your postpartum group. Like, for someone to, let's say, reach that point where they are really in crisis, the ability for them in that moment to reach
Hmm.
out to someone really vulnerably is so difficult.
Yeah.
And so there kind of needs to be a proactive conversation. And even if you ask that, right? If I ask you, Yvonne, like, what are those things I should look out for? And you're like, I have no idea.
Yeah.
Um, that's when you can then give examples, right? You can say, like,
Right.
I get worried sometimes when you isolate. Is that something I should pay attention to?
Hmm.
Um, it's not that you can, like, that you have to let go of all assumptions you have, but it's more so about like giving this person choice, giving this person, an open opportunity to share with you rather than you
Hmm.
deciding for them. And I think that's where a lot of us miss the mark in caring for folks, is we're making decisions for them instead of letting them make decisions for themselves.
Yeah, exactly. And that's also an opportunity for that connection. But I think a lot of the times the connection is so simple. Just sit,
Yeah.
listen,
Yeah.
talk. Like, it doesn't even have to be about, yes, like obviously in this example we're sharing, like, have the difficult conversation of what are these signs I should look out for. But it
Mhm.
doesn't always have to start that way. It can be like, hey, we watched this movie recently. What do you think? Like, that's
Totally.
literally the beginning portion of connection. And for folks who are in, a depressive state, or who are contemplating or having those thoughts, whatever that could look like for that person, that spark at a connection can be
Mhm.
it can mean so much. And we might not even realize how much it could mean, because if we don't know
Yeah.
what's going on in their body, in their head, in their
Yeah.
mind, yeah, we don't know those things. So just starting that, yeah, the interaction and engagement.
Yeah, and just someone knowing that, like, you care, but from a non-punitive place, right? I think that's
Mm,
where it is really difficult when we wait until something happens, because it's like, I know that I've done this, right?
yeah.
Even with people that I've cared about, I react, and I maybe reacted too harshly, or in too much of a problem solving way because it felt like immediate. And so
Yeah.
if we wait to react until something happens, we're more kind of prone to fall into those fears or anxieties
Hmm.
about it or whatever. And we'll miss this like really important moment of connection, like you said, where the person feels like, oh man, yeah, like Yvonne like really cares about me. Like there's a
Hmm.
thoughtfulness in talking about it beforehand. And it can be in a very lighthearted way or a very serious way, but allowing that to be a thing before crisis happens.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're being seen in that moment. Like, right? And that's
Yeah.
so powerful. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you touched on this a little bit, but why do people avoid reaching out sometimes? So if we do have these conversations, or if we do, share our concern for some behaviors that we think are maybe dangerous or concerning, why do people maybe avoid reaching out or being honest about how they're feeling?
I think for a lot of reasons, we talked about it in the suicidality group that I run last night. We talked about, like, being creative around asking for support and what that could look like,
Yeah.
because most people named that there's a huge discomfort and lack of trust and safety in, calling someone up or texting someone and being like, hey, I want to kill myself.
Yeah.
That for a lot of people feels like the most vulnerable and the most risky way to reach out. And I think in a lot of ways, and for a lot of people, that's because, um, whether they have experienced this, or they've seen and heard other people experiencing this, or they just think that this is what's going to happen, and for
Mm,
good reason, they're afraid of being minimized and dismissed.
yeah.
This happens, like, I've had so many people tell me of just like, basically they're not sick enough, right? They haven't made an attempt yet, or they haven't made a serious enough attempt yet, and so people don't take them seriously, which is
Yeah.
horrible.
Yeah.
People might call it attention seeking, and again, even if it is, like, why is it a bad thing for people to want connection with another person in
Hmm.
that moment? There's a huge proportion of people, and again, largely the ones that kind of follow along with a lot of the content that I produce, people who have had really harmful experiences with the um, legal enforcement punitive side of it, right? They've had
Yeah.
cops show up at their door because someone called them for a wellness check, or they've had, parents or coworkers call the ambulance and force them into a hospital. They've had negative and traumatic experiences at a hospital itself. And so I think a lot of people are terrified that if I do name this, I'm not going to be met with support and connection. I'm going to be met with this quick, immediate, and urgent response of, let's keep you safe by whatever means I deem necessary. I being the other
Yeah.
person. And yeah, if I think about the people who are the most likely to experience suicidality, they've often had, various forms of trauma or experiences in their life where they did lose control and they did lose autonomy and choice. And the idea of losing autonomy again would be way worse than being alone in that
Right.
experience.
Yeah.
Long-winded answer, but
No, I think that's such an important answer because it's like spot on, right? It's like that fear of having their reality be minimized by someone's opinion or perception of it, right? Like,
yeah,
even again, like you see it so much, unfortunately, like we've talked in previous podcast episodes about like the pros and cons of social media, but you go in, a celebrity talks about their mental health, and then you see the comments of, but your life is perfect, but you have all the money, but you have all of this, like you shouldn't feel this way. And that often
right.
happens in like smaller, not as public situations, right? Like
100%.
even within a household, if a teen is experiencing this, a parent with like, I can understand the intention of trying to support could say something that is minimizing, right? Like, but you have such a great
100%.
life. You have this beautiful family. You have this group of friends. You have, a scholarship to this. Like there's always this like conversation of like, why are you feeling that? Look at all the amazing things you have, when in reality
Yeah.
that's great. That isn't the case. That's not what the person is communicating to you about. Let's slow down and just listen. Let's just, again, kind of like what we mentioned before, be present with that person in the reality they're trying to explain to us in that moment.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's a real reflection of the, vast majority of people. And again, like therapists aren't, prone or immune to this. I've had these moments as well, but like the
Yeah.
vast majority of people have been conditioned to fear certain emotional states. And so when someone comes forward, even if they haven't even mentioned the word suicide yet, but they're
Mm-hmm.
coming forward in this state of hopelessness, powerlessness, deep sadness, I think so many of us have just learned that like, oh, this, I don't like this isn't comfortable, so I need to say something to move us out of this. And that's where
Yeah.
so much of that dismissiveness happens.
Mm-hmm.
And I also want to name to your question, I don't know why this isn't top of mind because I think about this constantly, but like, so yes, there's this potential of being dismissed and invalidated. Yes, there's this potential of people contacting emergency services or some other crisis system support that
Mm-hmm.
might lead to loss of autonomy and further challenges. But there's also this very real reality that Black, Indigenous, Brown, Asian, Latin, autistic, queer, disabled people have been killed repeatedly by police, by
Yeah.
RCMP. Last year in particular, there was a span of 11 days at the end of August of 2024, and 6 Indigenous people were killed by RCMP,
Yeah.
multiple of them during wellness checks over the span of 11 days. 6
That's
people,
crazy.
11 days. And so if you are, and again, there was one particular man, his name is Iggy Dadam. He was going through a mental health crisis, as was this kid, Haas Lightning, who's 15 years old, an Indigenous boy, going through a mental health crisis. And RCMP was called, and that's the response, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
a mental health crisis should never end in the death of someone.
Yeah.
And so when, people come to me, and especially early on in my career when I was still very much like, oh, okay, I got to call 911 and kind of following a lot of what we seem to be prescribed, people would
Mm-hmm.
tell me like, no, like I'm not dealing with police. And I was like, what? Why? And they were Indigenous or they were Black
Mm-hmm.
or they, their friend had a police interaction that ended up being horrible.
Yeah.
So there's a reality of death coming
Mm-hmm.
from this mental health crisis support that we've all been kind of trained and conditioned to utilize.
Mm-hmm.
And so it is a literal life preservation for many people to say, absolutely, I'm not going to talk about it. I will deal with this on my own,
Yeah.
because if I share it, it could end in my life, and not even by my own hand, but by the hand of police or RCMP or whomever else.
Right. Yeah. And that's a real fear just in general when
Yeah.
connecting with any kind of mental health support outside of it. It's, yeah, like the judgment, the how. Okay, I'm going to go into a ramble a little bit of like what
Yeah,
we
you're
are
good.
taught in school. Like in school, in like our programs as therapists, we are told that these are the things that we need to do. We need to, send to the hospital, do all of these things. And honestly, I think both of us were very like naive at that time. We were brand new. We were brand new
100%. I was like
into the
22.
profession. Yeah,
Yeah.
like we're trying to figure things out, and honestly a lot of the learning happens in the field. And so when we have that experience, when we learn these things, when we hear the constant stories of how traumatizing it was to go to the hospital trying to seek, like actively wanting to seek support for
Mhm.
their suicidal attempt or their
Mhm.
thought, like like it's so frustrating to have a positive intention of wanting to send somebody to get that direct support that maybe us as therapists aren't able to provide in that actual moment, or in that moment of crisis when a client is at home after the session. We want to provide those resources because we genuinely care about our clients, but those resources are not helpful. They are harmful. They're causing more trauma to the situation. And yeah, it's just, ugh. It's just,
It's it's so upsetting because, like, when I
yes.
talk about this, I think people have the idea sometimes, and granted, my intensity and how I talk about it makes sense why people assume this, but like, I don't have a complete, you know, their shit attitude towards hospitals. One of my best friends, she works at a hospital in Alberta.
Hmm.
I hear about the work that she does, like, and I appreciate, and I know that there are, particular staff and particular programs that have worked really hard and have made like incredible impacts on people's lives.
Yeah.
I think what gets lost in translation when we do talk about the harms of, police and hospital, or to not use them in crisis services, is one, people are like, well, what else exists? And I'll obviously talk about that in a little
Hmm.
bit. But the second is that, you can still involve, a crisis line or a hospital or whatever else in someone's, support plan if they want it, because
Yes.
it's a very different experience of someone saying, okay, I'm in crisis, I want to go to the hospital, and going, and whether or not they get admitted is a different story,
Right.
rather than someone being forced and detained and put into restraints and forcibly medicated against their will.
Yeah.
Like, all these things that happen when someone is potentially very reasonably saying, this is not a safe place for me, this is not a place
Hmm.
that I want to go to.
Hmm.
And again, we can look a lot, there's one particular content creator and like peer advocate, and they offer a lot of things, called Wildflower Alliance, and they post about a lot of research of like what happens, disproportionately in psych units, for Black, Brown, Indigenous, and other BIPOC folks, in terms of the level of forced medication, the fact that they're more likely to be put on antipsychotics than antidepressants, and more likely
Right.
to put on old age antipsychotics, which are more problematic. Like, there's all these realities that, people, especially those with intersectional identities, have to, be hyper vigilant to in their care and
Hmm.
in their wellness. And so
Hmm.
it's well within their right to say, that's not something I want in my care plan. And
Yeah.
that's where I think it's the responsibility of the therapist or the care provider or whomever else to be like, okay, we're not going to go with the default. Let's explore others. And until
Hmm.
you've explored others, I don't think that this should be the thing that you go to just because you're like, well, that's what we've been told.
Right. Yeah. And I think we're kind of going into our next area, which is the anti-carceral approach to moments of crisis or
Mhm.
when somebody is actively in that suicidal state. And so, yeah, I
Yeah.
guess, to define it a little bit, what is an anti-crisis or what is an anti-carceral approach?
Totally, because everyone asks me about this, and to me, it's just like it's my daily language now. But yes, it's
Yeah.
not known. So, carceral means anything involving incarceration, or particularly systems that use, force, coercion, punishment. And so these involve things like the use of police. These involve things like where treatment is forced. So things that do occur in hospital settings, whether or not that's with the use of restraints, with the use of medication, things like that. This also extends very obviously to the prison system, the prison industrial complex. The fact that there's a lot of people where, as a result of their mental health and well-being, they've been placed in prison or jail as a punitive way to kind of exert control over them. So anti-carceral practice or anti-carceral approaches, whatever you want to call it, is the opposition or being opposed to the use of carceral means. So opposed to punishment, opposed to force and coercion. And so really the thing that it's in support of is honoring autonomy, honoring dignity of the person that you're supporting, honoring their choice in their care, allowing there to be kind of open choice instead of you're forced into one or the other. And especially it's to kind of dismantle this hierarchy of power that naturally exists in healthcare. So as, a therapist working with any particular person, I hate that this is the default, but there is a default power imbalance. I do have more power in this relationship. Same as with a doctor, same as with, whatever other profession. So yeah, anti-carceral practice in its essence is the opposition of those carceral systems and a commitment to looking into true autonomous alternatives of support.
Yeah, we've talked a little bit already about why maybe we avoid calling the police or why people may request that the police not be called in that moment. And I think you touched on like the negative impacts that some folks people of color, people that are in the LGBTQ community, there is more harm at calling the police. And so the avoidance of that.
Documented continuously. Yes. That's not conjecture. That's not an opinion. Like, it is documented so heavily that certain marginalized communities will experience so much more harm and death at the hands of police and other carceral systems.
So it's a real reality for folks when they are saying, please don't contact the police. This is how I'm feeling. So what are some of those alternative to police involvement when, maybe, some of our listeners have somebody in their lives, whether it's a family member, a loved one, or somebody at work or in their community? Like, what can they do in those moments instead of involving the police?
Yeah. So can I like name and refer to some particular like creators and accounts and things? I don't want to necessarily just like list them all off because that might feel very monotonous. But what I'll preface it by saying is, one, again, I hope and really encourage folks to be proactive with those that you care about. Right. This might not mean that you connect with every person that you love and be like, hey, let's prepare for crisis. But maybe there's particular people that, again, are, maybe your son is queer and they're like seeing all of these things happen politically in the States, or maybe your best friend is an immigrant, or maybe they don't experience any of those like intersectional identities that typically face oppression, but that they're more likely to struggle with their mental health. Having the conversation proactively and asking them about what they would like first before deciding for them. But when it comes to alternative supports, again, stepping out of this default of like call 911 or call a crisis line, there are so many peer-led groups that exist primarily in the States of people who are lived survivors. They are psychiatric survivors. They experience chronic suicidality. They may have a very different attitude towards suicidality from a welcoming and open perspective, right? An understanding of how suicidal thoughts sometimes, if not often, come up to protect us and, try and give us an escape and all these things. So the ones I have this huge list that I'll send and you'll link it and whatever.
Yeah, we'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah, there's a few that I'll highlight in particular. So one that I already named is Wildflower Alliance. That's their at on Instagram, and I'm sure other mediums. They have a whole huge big link tree. They have a lot of resources available. So they have an alternatives to suicide group that meets frequently. They just posted about a new one specifically for queer folks. But they also have huge amounts of resources about kind of research showing why traditional suicide prevention strategies are not helpful. They have kind of like different harm reduction guides and ways to like build your own crisis plan. So again, if you're a family member or a support that's looking to be more informed, this isn't just something that you should send to people, but really something you should look through on your own.
Yeah, yeah.
There's another person called Kate Madden. They run a weekly peer support group for suicidality. They meet every Sunday. It's donations based, so it's totally free if you don't have any financial ability to attend. But they also have something called the Aware Care Library. So it's this kind of like e-community or online community for suicidality that includes access to the group, but also includes a lot of other resources and writings and kind of different activities of sort, for lack of a better word, about changing your relationship with death and the idea of suicide, to kind of step away from this fear mongering that a lot of us have.
Yeah.
There are two organizations that I'm a huge fan of. I've done trainings with them. I connect with them very often. One is called Stronger You, and the other one is called Thrive Lifeline. Stronger You has a Discord community that you can join for free, and they also have monthly groups for suicidality. And Thrive Lifeline, they kind of work in close connection on a lot of things, but Thrive Lifeline has a 24/7 text-based crisis line that you can use.
Oh, wow.
It's based out of the States, so you have
Right.
to be mindful that we did the math, and if you don't have US coverage, it's like 300 texts is maybe like $50. So that's the thing to think
Okay.
about. But they have that crisis lifeline along with a huge list of resources about alternative ways to approach suicide in their website.
And you also have a group.
I also have a group. Yeah. So my intention in my group is based from a few places. One was that all of these accounts and resources that I've listed so far are based in the States, and I found it extremely difficult and still have yet to find any in Canada.
Yeah.
It also felt really important for me to have a safer, I won't say safe, but a safer place for my clients and the people that I support to be able to go to, because again, this is largely coming from a place where most of the people I support do not consent to having, police or crisis lines in their care. So the group that I run is every 2 weeks. We're coming up on our last 2 sessions of this round, and then we'll be starting up again in the summer, probably in June. But
Nice.
it's a very like open, unstructured group. We ask everyone what topic they want to cover the next time. It's not like psychoed. It's not about teaching you how to be less suicidal. It's actually much more about like learning to live with suicidality and to accept it and welcome it, rather than, again, this kind of like very fearful ideology that we've been taught about it. Yeah, I have so many more, but it will be crazy to list them all off. So I'll send that to you and you'll link it. But
Yeah.
there are, I think the important piece that I want to really amplify in this is there are existing alternatives, like many. And even if the person in question is not going to connect with one of these outside groups or communities, there's also a huge number of alternatives that they can do on their own, ways that they might be able to keep themselves safe, or ways that you might be able to lend support, even if it's like, hey, I'm going to get groceries delivered to your house. Like, I've had so many people tell me that if someone just fucking sent over groceries, oh my God, that would make that moment so much more bearable, because I wouldn't be in this state of overwhelm of like, I can't do anything, or there's way too much to do.
Yeah. And I think there's also the prevention piece.
My heart rate is like high. I'm like, this
I love it. You're so pumped.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it though. I think your group sounds amazing. It sounds like it's very much a support group where you're all kind of learning together from each other. And so that's lovely. I'm going to add that to the show notes. So if folks want to find you, they know where. And yes, please send those resources. But I think there's so much more, like we could have a whole other podcast episode on just preventative measures, because I think like groceries, finances, the environment, like all of those things have a huge role in
Yeah.
that prevention piece, right? Like
Yeah,
getting somebody's
100%.
groceries, that helps them so much financially, but also mentally, emotionally, physically, like in every way. And so, yeah, I think there are ways that, folks can support one another without involving any possible harm, like again, police, or if the person in question here wants to go into the hospital, we can do that in a way that is going to feel supported and not
Mhm.
forced. And so, yeah, I guess we're going to put all of your community resources on our show notes, but some other ones, there are peer support networks. So trying to find a peer support network in your community is going to be helpful. Therapists and counselors, like we are here to support you in whatever way you need. And so if it's like, let's talk about it and to try to, again, create what you said of, that's like, how can we live through that suicidality? Like that can be something that your therapist can support you with. But again, be mindful of finding that fit for you so that you are finding somebody who has similar values and views of what you are looking to get from therapy. And there are so many like areas of support, not only for those who are experiencing the suicidal thoughts or the wanting to hurt themselves or kill themselves. There's also so much support for loved ones who have either maybe lost a loved one from suicide or have experienced this before and are wanting to provide support to other people who may be impacted by that. So just trying to find those communities in your area, but also community is so important. And so kind of connecting with other people in our own like private community, which could be like other family members that feel safe and comfortable, other friends in our area. If somebody belongs to a church group or some other kind of group in their, I guess in their system, in their community, then that can be something that's resourceful as well. My God, my cat is going to come and attack me.
No, I love that. And
So,
I think it is like it's we're wired to be social, and I just want to I don't disagree with you whatsoever. I just want to hold the nuance that I know there's many people where things like family are not an accessible and safe resource, or things
yeah,
like even just like in-person community, right? I think about a lot of my disabled folks who like they are very immunosuppressed, and so unless it's a masked on event, there's a lot of in-person, if not all in-person events that are inaccessible.
yeah.
So I name that because I have some people who are really
No, thank
reserved
you.
and hesitant about like
Hmm.
online communities,
Hmm.
and that might be the space that is like more accessible to you, especially in those moments of like feeling withdrawn or feeling like you don't want to be around anyone else.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And no, thank you for adding that because you're so right. Um, okay, we have like a minute left, and the last little thing I wanted to talk about was like when to seek support, but I guess we kind of already talked about that throughout. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Is there any final
Gotcha.
takeaways? Are there any final takeaways that you want to share to folks who may have a loved one who is struggling?
I've said it already, but my big advice is don't make decisions for them. Let them make decisions for themselves.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. If that's all you take from this podcast, then that's the one. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I really
Well,
appreciate you being willing to talk about this. I know it's like a scary topic sometimes for people,
mhm.
especially when
Yeah.
I get on and I'm like,
No, I love it. And
all these
honestly, I
things.
would love to have you back to talk about like some other, like I said, a whole podcast on prevention. And I think,
Yeah,
you know,
100%.
it would be so fun to kind of talk again. So, yeah, thank you so much for all your wisdom and all of the
No
awesome
problem.
suggestions and resources. We'll make sure to have those in the show notes. But yeah, thanks again. Oh,
Thank
wait, where
you.
can people find you? Social media?
Oh, at Kaitlin, Kaitlin _ the relatable therapist, or you can go to baldwinpsychotherapy.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Make sure to follow Kaitlin and us on Outside the Therapy Room Pod on social media. And yeah, have a good day. Bye.
Thanks, Stefan. Bye.
Thank you for listening to Outside the Therapy Room. This podcast is intended for educational and entertainment purposes only. If you reside in Ontario and are interested in working with one of our therapists, please visit our website in the show notes. If you reside outside of Ontario, a quick Google search or search through Psychology Today will help you find a therapist near you.